Hello and welcome to a special World Ocean Day edition of the Daily Climate Show. On today's programme, how destructive fishing practices are releasing carbon into the atmosphere and damaging supposedly protected areas. Letting nature take over, the solution to sea level rise on the Gower Peninsula. And the fishermen turning the tide on plastic in the Mediterranean. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those coming up with the solutions. Well, today we're marking World Ocean Day and this year's theme is life and livelihoods. Not only do our oceans produce more than 50% of the planet's oxygen, they are home to most of the Earth's biodiversity and billions of people depend on them for their main source of food. And our oceans can help combat global warming, absorbing around 30% of the carbon dioxide produced by humans. But they are under threat. In a moment, we'll be finding out how one UK community is adapting to rising sea levels. But first, there's a warning today that our seas are in a death spiral from climate change and destructive fishing. Greenpeace says that the chemistry of our waters is rapidly changing as boats using fishing methods such as bottom trawling stir up carbon dioxide and deplete already low fish stocks. Well, damaging fishing practices are a huge issue around the world, as our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
The ocean is in a death spiral, says Greenpeace, and they're on a mission to protect it. For 6 months, they'll patrol marine conservation zones along the south coast, looking out for destructive forms of fishing, factory trawlers with nets a mile long and boats that drag heavy equipment along the fragile seabed.
We're seeing the ocean facing more pressures than ever before. We're seeing climate change, we're seeing plastic pollution, we're seeing overfishing, and they're all interacting with each other to create quite a dangerous situation.
Earlier this year, Greenpeace found evidence of unregulated fishing by Chinese trawlers in the Indian Ocean. Some turn off their satellite trackers to hide from authorities. It's likely to be happening in UK waters too.
This isn't just about fish stocks and biodiversity, it's about the climate too. Protected areas in the UK's offshore waters contain an estimated 26.5 million tonnes of carbon. And when fishing gear is dragged along the bottom, all that gets stirred up.
Environmentalists and those trying to eke out a living from small boats are now often on the same side. Martin barely catches enough fish to pay for his fuel.
I think we're facing an environmental disaster here. We were catching sort of 30 odd boxes and now we're down to around about 1.5 boxes.
The government has plans to ban all destructive activities in some protected areas, but Greenpeace says more needs to be done more quickly to keep the ocean healthy. Thomas Moore, Sky News in New Haven.
Now, one of the ways that we track the impact of global warming on our planet is, of course, through sea level rise. It's mainly caused by two factors, both related to global warming. Well, the one that we've often talked about on this show is water from melting ice, such as glaciers and ice sheets. The second, though, is thermal expansion. Water expands as it gets warmer, so as our oceans heat up, those sea levels rise. Well, global sea levels have risen between 21 and 24 centimetres since the Industrial Revolution. And crucially, the rate of that rise is accelerating, more than doubling from 1.4 millimetres per year throughout most of the 20th century to 3.6 millimetres per year from 2006 to 2015. And the impact of those rising sea levels is already being felt in the UK. In 2014, the seawall at Cwm Ivy on the Gower Peninsula in Wales suffered severe damage. But rather than rebuild it, the National Trust let nature take over, as Sky's Dan Whitehead reports.
When I came down to site, and the site that had been an agricultural field the previous day was, 3 foot under seawater.
7 years ago, the seawall defending this farmland on the Gower Peninsula gave way. But rather than rebuild, the National Trust, controversially at the time, let the water take over.
We don't defend against the sea. You know, we don't do it. We understand that, you know, habitats need to be dynamic. You know, things need to be able to change.
The result, an abundance of salt marsh brimming with flower and fauna and locking in carbon.
Most people can see that we've got really great nature here. You know, if you come down on a quiet morning, you'll be able to see an otter.
Over 300 years or so, there have been attempts to repair this seawall, but that effort has now stopped. And there are many who believe that letting nature take its course is actually the best way to enhance environments like this.
We know that we're going to lose nearly 1,200 hectares of intertidal area just from coastal squeeze and coastal pressure by the end of the century. So we need these small areas where we're giving some land back to nature.
Letting the sea take over here has brought in new life. And while holding the line against rising tides is needed in built-up coastal areas, easing the pressure elsewhere can create new landscapes for years to come. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, at Kumaivi.
Well, with me now is Jacqueline Savitz, Chief Policy Officer for North America at the conservation organisation Oceana. A very good afternoon to you, Jacqueline. We've had more countries pledging to protect 30% of the oceans. Great news. How far are we away from that being a reality?
Well, I think we have some work to do. I know a number of countries are aiming to protect 30% by 2030. And I believe that's very much possible, especially if we make sure that those protections are meaningful, enforceable protections for our oceans. It'll allow us to rebuild our fisheries and protect ocean ecosystems.
Protections, though, do come at a cost, don't they? So how long will it take before the benefits of that kind of protection will outweigh the costs?
Well, you know, I think it depends on different fisheries. What we've found is that if we rebuild fisheries, we can actually feed 1 billion people a seafood meal every day. That's obviously a goal we want to aspire to, especially with food insecurity. And so sustainable fisheries actually has benefits not just for food security, but for livelihoods, for the economy, for the environment. And that's something we obviously want to work towards.
Yeah, and that's what today is all about, isn't it? And we saw also the damaging impact of bottom trawling on the oceans. Why not just ban it outright?
Well, it depends on where you are. In some areas, bottom trawling may be perfectly fine, but in areas where we have bottoms that have high habitat values, they're the nursery areas, they're spawning areas for fish. Those are the areas where we want to prevent bottom trawling, and that will be done. We've seen that done in many cases, and that will allow fisheries to thrive.
We also saw, Jacqueline, in the other report that we were showing, some of the benefits of working with rising sea levels. Jackie, and how far are we in adapting to that as a reality?
Well, I think, you know, adaptation is something that we will be able to do in some cases and not in others. And that's why it becomes so important that we mitigate the impacts of climate change, that we address that carbon dioxide emissions, which you mentioned. The oceans are absorbing 1/3 of what we're emitting, but it's making them sick in the process. And the only way to stop that sort of runaway train of climate change, sea level rise, ocean acidification, is to stop releasing so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that means moving away from the use of fossil fuels and shifting to clean energy, which doesn't lead to sea level rise.
Well, Jacqueline Savitz, it's been fascinating talking to you. Happy World Ocean Day. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Samantha. Same to you.
Well, you can find out more about World Ocean Day and indeed why it matters, as well as how important the sea is in the fight against climate change. That's on our website. You just need to head to skynews.com/climate. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other climate news now. And Boris Johnson has told cabinet ministers that this week's G7 meeting is a chance to reinvigorate the international community to tackle climate change. Leaders from the UK, US, Canada, France, Italy, Germany and Japan will meet to discuss global issues, including the climate crisis. And on Friday, we'll have a special G7 edition of the Daily Climate Show live from Cornwall. And you can see that here on Sky News at 6:30 p.m. A campaign group is calling on the government to rewild 1/10 of national parks to tackle the nature and climate crises. Rewilding Britain says the process, which restores ecosystems to a more natural state, could boost jobs and help the UK meet its pledge to protect 30% of land by 2030. And water voles are being released in Yorkshire in a bid to save the endangered mammal. The project by Yorkshire Water is part of their Waterworks for Wildlife initiative. It's a £1.6 million scheme that hopes to boost natural habitats across the country. Water voles have suffered a steep decline in recent years as a result of habitat loss, water pollution and predation by the invasive American mink. Now for an ocean-themed climate diary. Today we are hearing from Lefteris Arapakis. He founded Greece's first professional fishing school to teach more sustainable techniques, but also to encourage fishermen to remove plastic from the Mediterranean Sea.
I'm coming from a family of fishermen. Actually, my family has been fishermen for 5 generations. One day, I was talking with my father, and he was complaining that the fishermen couldn't find enough personnel for the fishing boats. I didn't know anything about fishing. I think even today I'm the worst fisherman in the country. And in the last 3.5 years, we have trained more than 115 unemployed people to the Greek fishing sector. I was shocked to see that the fishermen were collecting with their nets not only fish, but also plastic, lots of it. We started training fishermen from our port to bring plastic back in the land. The fishermen catch this plastic by accident, so we give them the motivation and the system to bring it back to the land. We have collected already more than 110,000 kilos of plastic from the bottom of the sea. Plans for the future is to be able to replicate this model in other parts of the world. We believe that we can make an actual difference and a real impact in the world.
Well, that is everything from us for today. Tomorrow, it's a battle bus, but not as you know it. We're going to be finding out more about the UK's first fully electric coach on a zero-carbon tour. That's at the same time tomorrow here on Sky News. Hope to see you then.